In the first part of this presentation, I will discuss ethno-religious identity formation and transformation of the descendants of Islamized Armenians through their post-memories. How do the descendants bear the memories that have been transmitted to them, considering that some descendants chose to go back to Christianity, while some others combine Islam, Kurdishness, socialism, feminism, or other cultural components of their identities with Armenian national identity. I argue that though the descendants of Islamized Armenians share the common post-memories, they do not always constitute a homogeneous and a well-bounded group. In the second part of this presentation, I will discuss how self-identification processes of descendants are shaped by their family stories of perpetration, victimhood, rescue, and survival. How do the descendants narrate the physical and cultural extermination of their ancestors by the Ottoman state and Kurdish tribes in the post-genocide era? Do the perpetration and rescue stories shape the descendants' identity narratives? Before we get into content and the theoretical discussions, I would like to briefly talk about the conducted interviews with 30 descendants in Turkey in 2015. All the interviewees are the descendants of Armenian survivors who during the genocide resided in the vilayets of Diyarbakir and Bitlis. The descendants are between the age of 21 and 93. All of them are the second, third, and fourth generation survivors. 9 of these respondents currently reside in Diyarbakir, 6 of them in Batman's rural areas, 7 in Sasun, and finally 8 people reside in Istanbul. The number of second generation survivors is 8, the third is 9, and the fourth generation is 13 people. In this part of the presentation, I will talk about the ethno-religious self-identification processes of the descendants in Turkey. The existing research suggests that there are some terminological problems when referring to the genocide survivors whose parents were forcibly Islamized through Turkish state policies and societal pressure. Mostly they are called as the Islamized, Muslim, hidden, or crypto-Armenians. All of these terms remain insufficient and problematic in explaining the experiences and identities of the descendants. The term, for instance, the term Islamized Armenians is often used in reference to the policies of mass conversions during the Armenian massacres and the genocide. Using this term in explaining the historical atrocities does not constitute a terminological issue. However, it becomes problematic when it's used for the descendants of Islamized Armenians, the individuals from later generations who were born into Muslim, Kurdish, atheist, socialist, or other various environments in Turkey. Similarly, the term Muslim Armenian gives an impression to ignore the violent experiences of Armenians, deaths, exiles, and forced conversions Ottoman Armenians have experienced. Both terms leave no space for the descendants' choices of remembering or not remembering their Armenian ancestry, commemorating or not commemorating the genocide, and the self-identifying or not self-identifying with Armenian national identity. What is the right definition for these people whose ancestors were forcibly converted to Islam? Ceren Özgül argues that the most logical term to define these people is the descendants of Islamized Armenians. Moving from Özgül's conceptualization, I suggest 4 subcategories in which the descendants of Islamized Armenians can be defined. The first one is the descendants who have chosen to embrace Christianity. The second is the descendants who negotiate Islam with Armenian national identity. The third is the descendants who do not feel affiliated with any kind of religion, but identify themselves with cultural or political affiliations. The last one is the descendants who choose to remain as Turk or Kurd despite discovering their Armenian roots. My argument here is that the identification processes of the descendants are based on the memories that are transmitted to them, as well as their own memories and their own present experiences and choices. I perceive identity as individual rather than substantial or collective. I assert that focusing on the self-identification processes of the descendants would clarify the definitional paradoxes which I discussed above. I would like to give some examples from the ethno-religious identifications, self-identifications of the descendants. For instance, Esra, a young woman from Batman, doesn't feel affiliated with one identity. She melts ethnic, religious, and political identities into one self. She says, I'm a Muslim who wears hijab first and foremost. I feel Kurdish because Kurds have been persecuted for decades. When I think of my great-grandmother who was forcibly married to a Kurd, I feel Armenian. And I often feel feminist. My identity constantly changes. I do not want one identity. I want to be sided with the oppressed, not the oppressor. And Armenian women have been the oppressed ones in Turkey. My cousins, she stops. We are the grandchildren of the same people. They heard the same stories from my grandmother. They do not feel close to those memories. They say, we are not Armenians, we're devout Muslims. I'm a devout Muslim too. I wore hijab in high school. You do not have to be non-Muslim to be an Armenian. End of quotation. Another descendant, Nihat, is a high school history teacher in Sasun, a village of Batman province, who combines the three different identities into one self-identification form. His grandmother was Armenian, grandfather was Kurdish. In addition to combine these two inherited national identities, he added his religious affiliation into two intertwined. I quote, I am 25% Armenian, 25% Kurdish, and 50% Muslim. My identity doesn't revolve around Armenianness only. I feel equally Kurdish. I care about Kurds' motivation to gain their rights from the Turkish state. I'm also practicing Muslim. I'm also a practicing Muslim. Islamic life is essential to me. Without praying or talking to God, I'm not myself. Islam is the most crucial component of my identity. And then there are some descendants who decided to convert to Christianity. Sami and Rahime, whom you can see on the slide, participated in a birthright program in Armenia in 2013. They decided to get baptized in Yerevan and they changed their names. Sami says, I quote, I've never been religious. I felt very close to the socialists, but sometimes I had an urge to read the Bible and the Quran to see whether they could convince me. I do not want to be disrespectful to you, referring me, but I could not find anything in them. I became a Christian not because I believe, but because my grandfathers were Christian. They took that identity from us, now I'm getting it back. There are also descendants who do not feel any religious affiliation. Sevan from Istanbul identifies himself as an individual Armenian who is independent from Islam, Christianity, or any other religion. I quote, I am neither Muslim nor Christian. I go to the church for maintaining my traditions. I like the Easter festivals. In my workplace, I have only Muslim friends. They're mostly Arabs with Turkish citizenship. My office mate was shocked when he learned that I'm an Armenian. He asked my name. I said, I'm Sevan. He asked me the meaning of my name. When I said, it's a name of a lake in Yerevan. It's the name of a lake in Yerevan. He realized Then I told him, I am not a Christian nor a Muslim. I have not made up my mind yet. To conclude this part, I suggest to perceive identity as individual rather than substantial. Considering that these descendants, some of these descendants go back to Christianity, while some combine religious, political, or cultural components of their identities with their Armenian affiliation, I argue that the descendants of Islamized Armenians do share the common post memories, but they don't constitute a homogeneous, a well-bounded group. Let's go to the second part of the presentation. I want to continue with the memories towards Kurdish perpetration and rescue during the genocide and the aftermath of the genocide. Archival research shows that many Kurdish tribes collaborated with the Ottoman state in killing and deporting Armenians, confiscating properties, abducting Armenian women, and observing children into Muslim households. In the vilayets of Diyarbakır and Bitlis, the Mutki tribe, Bekran, Beder, Bozek, Jalal, Dekshuri, Heverkan, Penjinar, Zirki tribe took part in the physical extermination of Armenians. Oral history works of historians and Kurdish Dengbeş songs, which means oral songs in Kurdish, depict the perpetrations of Kurds in Eastern Anatolia. Through these accounts, now we know that perpetration and rescue stories also existed in the Armenian genocide. I wish to present few of these cases of perpetration and rescue here. Hangul, one of my interviewees from Diyarbakır, narrated the perpetration of her own grandfather. Her grandfather, who was a reputable member of the Zirki tribe, was known for his killings in the Kazas of Hazro and Lice. His name was Hussein. Hangul was so distanced from her grandfather because, I quote, "Of course, he was guilty and responsible for everything. He had killed my grandmother's former husband, abducted her, and forcibly Islamized her. He confiscated all the remaining properties, and she was not happy because he never cared about her. She died soon after he married a second wife. Her name was Vartanush, and my name is Hangul, which means the same in Kurdish. I feel affiliated with her much more than my grandfather." Here's a perpetration story told by a Kurdish Armenian who considers herself as an atheist and politically leftist. The Islamization of her own grandmother Vartanush had upset Hangul. There were 14 more cases of forced marriage among all my interviews with survivors. Besides the perpetration stories, there are accounts of survivors about Kurdish rescuers who were either ordinary villagers or tribe members. We know from the archival works that Kurdish ashirets resisted the Ottoman government's orders and protected their Armenians from the attacks of other Kurdish tribes. The motivation for such protections or rescues might be because Kurdish tribes had previous experiences in conflict with the Ottoman state and the neighboring tribes, and presumably these conflicts made them more likely to play a rescuer role in the genocide. Milan tribe from Diyarbakır and Reşkotan tribe from Beşiri district and the Shigo tribe from Sassun had saved Armenians from killings. I would like to give one example here from one of my interviewees, Sevan, whose family was rescued. He says, "My grandparents escaped Syria with the help of Reşkotan tribe. They resided there in 1916 and 17. They came back to Harniki village after the Kurdish attacks stopped. Since then, we all have good relations with Reşkotans. For instance, I'm aware that I'm not a Kurd, but I have so much appreciation for Kurds in my area. This peaceful experience between us and Kurds led all of us in the family to vote the Kurdish political parties ever since they joined the elections. Ordinary Kurds also protected or hid Armenians during the genocide. Sami from Kult district of Diyarbakir narrated his grandfather Alexander's escape and survival story. His grandfather was a 9-year-old child who was protected by an ordinary man named Haji Muhammad. Alexander was called Filite Gochkar. Filit means in Kurdish the one who survived, and Gochkar or Goshkakar means shoemaker in Armenian language. Apparently, Alexander had learned how to make shoes from his father. And when Sami was telling me about this story, he voiced a suspicion that has been in his mind for a while. He said he maybe survived because he was a shoemaker. Everybody knows that only Armenians could have such artisanship. Kurds were not involved in those. I asked him what would change if Haji Muhammad hid his father in order to make money. He said, then that means he did not rescue him only for the sake of saving a 9-year-old. He saved him for his own desire to gain something from him. We will never know what was Haji Muhammad's intention when he had saved Alexander. Yet this story could give us an idea about how the very process of the genocide was complicated by different acts of Kurds, such as perpetrating, rescuing, helping, or benefiting. These acts clearly blur the lines of clear categories of perpetration, help, victimhood, and beneficiaries. I would like to conclude with a note that these oral accounts, were only the ones I found. But let's keep in mind that there are thousands and thousands who do not wish to talk, or who prefer to hide, who do not remember, who doesn't want to remember, who ignore their Armenian backgrounds and the painful experience their families had. So then the further research on oral history accounts of survivors on local basis will elaborate more researches made on the Armenian genocide much more. Thank you very much for listening.